Hello, John Gillespie here with the AI Razor. We've audited dozens of n8n and zapier workflows. The same 5 problems seem to show up almost every time. Some cost thousands a month in wasted API calls. Another is a security issue that could get you breached. We're going to talk about all 5, and I've got a deep dive on each. One of them's linked below. The first one is your API keys are sitting in plain text inside code nodes. Every execution log, every workflow export, they're all visible. The fix is a centralized config node, and we're going to give you a full walkthrough. The link is below. Problem 2 is you don't have any error handling. So everything's great when you have the happy path. We're all happy it works. We get to go home. Then one API returns a 500 and everything silently breaks. No alert. No retry. Nobody knows. Wire up error outputs on every external node, and I show you exactly how to do this in one of our deep dives. And you'll have an error output that will give you some feedback. We just went through and showed you a little bit about the screen error automation. Then the next thing is you need polling instead of webhooks. So you see this workflow that I'm showing right here. This is the first workflow in Occam's that takes SEC filings for 8,000 companies whenever they are filed, and we use a webhook. If we used a trigger checking an API every 5 minutes, that's 288 calls for nothing. You need to switch to webhooks. One call when there's something to work on. And then the next thing to talk about is that you don't have data validation. So you get data that comes in from an external call, and maybe it's got a null value. Maybe it doesn't have a lot of the data that you expected. So you need something that normalizes the data. And this code, the code node here, basically takes the SEC filings and makes sure that we have the appropriate pieces of data that we need. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is that you don't want huge monolithic workflows. And this one is getting pretty big, and it could have gotten a lot bigger if I just kept throwing new nodes because we had a lot to do. But what you need to do is when you start getting, above 40 for sure, you need to look for breakpoints where you would call a child workflow. So when we go into sector specific routing on Occam's finance, we end up, this is an example of the business development company valuation where it calls the child workflow to go through the final bits and give it the specific data that type of economic sector needs to get a reasonable workflow. A reasonable validation. So these are some of the things. We'll go into a little bit more detail on each of the videos. There'll be 5 of them total. There's one you'll have a link to below, and the rest of them will be coming out over the next week. If they're useful to you, if you could subscribe. Basically we'll be publishing a few videos every week with the things that we learn with all the work that we're doing for ourselves and our clients. Anyway, thank you for joining, and we'll see you again soon.